Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Guru Vrinda ki, Shri Prabhupada ki, Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Shri Shri Kod Nitai Mahaprasasha ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande. First of all, a short reading from Shri Prabhupada. Condensed one volume version. As part of his instruction and example, Srila Prabhupada knew he would have to show people just how to die. He'd escaped death a number of times by Krishna's grace, by the prayers of his disciples, and by his own pure and powerful will to propagate his movement. But from the signs given to him by Lord Krishna in 1977, Srila Prabhupada began decisively and conclusively ending his mission in the material world, and among his final duties was his giving complete guidelines on how to die. He was perfectly showing how to do that which everyone has to do, but which is most difficult to do successfully, die. Those people that think, to die successfully, it's not a question they ask, is it? It's like how to not die is more the question. But a loving conflict was there. Prabhupada loved his disciples. He also knew they were not yet fully mature in his movement. already had great potency and stature in the world, and yet it had many enemies. He was inclined to always protect his devotees, his movement, and all living entities, even the animals. So when his most intimate and faithful disciples pleaded that they could not go on without him, he had turned from showing how to die, agreeing to stay with them and preach. But at what point would they ever be willing to let him go? At what point could he say that the world of Maya and the enemies of Krishna were all gone? At what point would his disciples become fully mature? In following his decision to stay, Srila Prabhupada turned himself over to his disciples, allowing them to care for him completely. Those who took part recalled that never before had Srila Prabhupada allowed such intimate dealings between himself and his disciples. The only thing comparable was in New York in 1966 when he had been very intimate in dealing with the first persons to join him, persons who had known nothing of the etiquette of approaching the spiritual master. But those who were present now and who had also been present then said that these days were even more intimate. At one point, Kirtananda firmly insisted that Srila Prabhupada drink a full cup of juice. Even when he said he had had enough, Kirtananda felt awkward, insisting, "I am not like Mother Yashoda that I can do this," he said. "I keep remembering that you are my spiritual master." But Srila Prabhupada allowed him to be ordered by Kirtananda. Similarly, Bhavananda, Tamal Krishna, Bhakti Charu, Upendra, and other servants coaxed Srila Prabhupada to follow certain diets and cared for his body constantly. The other devotees were reminded of the story of Ishwara Puri, who gave intimate bodily service to his spiritual master, Madhavendra Puri. When Madhavendra Puri was in the last stages of his life and apparently invalid, according to the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it was by this menial bodily service that Sri Ishwara Puri proved his love for his spiritual master and was allowed to become the spiritual master of Lord Chaitanya. Sri Prabhupada ki jai. When Hari Sori Prabhu was visiting here a few years back, he used to do a series of talks called the Living Bhagavatam, and he covered different topics. One topic he covered was Prabhupada and medicine. He said that Prabhupada, the devotees, they tried to care for him by getting him to take medicine, but he was never he wasn't a good patient. He even admitted himself he wasn't a good patient. So regarding the different types of medicine, when he says allopathic, he says allopathic is Western medicine, it's medicine of demons. So that was his excuse for not taking that. And then the Ayurvedic medicine, he said nobody knows how to do it these days. And that was his excuse for not taking that. And then the homeopathic medicine says it's simply coloured water. So, and Prabhupada also says that a pure devotee is callous to his body. So we shouldn't try to be like that artificially. Otherwise, it will create a lot of problem for us. But naturally, when one is on such a high level, that they don't really care for the body. But here we're seeing that Prabhupada was allowing the devotees to care for his body because they wanted him to stay. And ultimately, we see that that doesn't last for long. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 1, entitled The Supreme Lord is Equal to Everyone, and its text number 35. Dehendriyasu hinanam. Dehendriyasu hinanam. Vaikuntha Pura Vasinam. Vaikuntha Pura Vasinam. Deha Sambandha Sambadam. Deha Sambandha Sambadam. Etad Akyatum Arhasi etadakyatum arhasi dehendriya suhinanam vaikunta purvasinam deha sambandha sambadam etadakyatum arhasi dehendriya suhinanam vaikunta purvasinam deha sambandha sambadam etadakyatum arhasi dehendriya suhinanam vaikunta purvasinam deha sambandha sambadam etadakyatum arhasi. Chant. Deha of a material body, Indriya, your senses, Asu, life breath, Hinanam, of those devoid, Vaikuntha Pura, of Vaikuntha, Vasinam, of the residents, Deha Sambandha, in a material body, Sambadam, bondage, Eta, this, Akyatum Arhasi, please describe. Translation: the bodies of the inhabitants of Vaikuntha are completely spiritual, having nothing to do with material body, senses, or life air. Therefore, kindly explain how associates of the personality of Godhead were cursed to descend in material bodies like ordinary persons. The bodies of the inhabitants of Vaikuntha are completely spiritual, having nothing to do with the material body, senses, or life air. Therefore, kindly explain how associates of the personality of Godhead were cursed to descend in material bodies like ordinary persons. This very significant question would be difficult for an ordinary person to answer, but Narada Muni, being an authority, could answer it. Therefore Maharaj Yudhisthira inquired from him, saying, Etad akyatum ahasi, only you can explain the reason. From authoritative sources it can be discerned that associates of Lord Vishnu who descend from Vaikuntha do not actually fall. They come with the purpose of fulfilling the desire of the Lord, and their descent to this material world is comparable to that of the Lord. The Lord comes to this material world through the agency of his internal potency, and similarly, when a devotee or associate of the Lord descends to this material world, he does so through the action of the spiritual energy. The pastime conducted by the Supreme Personality of Godhead is an arrangement by Yogamaya, not Mahamaya. Therefore, it is to be understood that when Jaya and Vijaya descended to this material world, they became They came because there was something to be done for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Otherwise, it is a fact that no one falls from Vaikuntha. Of course, a living entity who desires Sayuja Mukti remains in Krishna's Brahman effulgence, which is dependent on Krishna's body. Brahman he prastaham. Such an impersonalist who takes shelter of the Brahman effulgence must surely fall down. This is stated in the Shastra, Bhagavatam 10.2.32. Ye nye ravindaksha vimuktamaninas tvayastabhavad avishuddha buddhaya haruya krichrena param padam tada patyantyado nadrika yushmadangraya. Lord, the intelligence of those who think themselves liberated but who have no devotion is impure, even though they rise to the highest point of liberation by dint of severe penances and austerities. They are sure to fall down again into material existence, for they do not take shelter at the lotus feet. The impersonalists cannot reach the Vaikuntha planets to become associates of the Lord, and therefore, according to their desires, Krishna gives them Sayuja Mukti. However, since Sayuja Mukti is partial Mukti, they must fall again to this material world. It's said that the individual soul falls from Brahmaloka. This applies to the impersonalist. From authoritative sources, it is learned that Jai and Vijay were sent to this material world to fulfill the Lord's desire to fight. The Lord also sometimes wants to fight, but who can fight with the Lord but a very confidential devotee of the Lord? Jai and Vijay descended to this world to fulfill the Lord's desire. Therefore, in each of their three births, first is Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, second is Ravana and Kumbhakarna, and third is Shishupal and Dantavakra. The Lord personally killed them. In other words, these associates of the Lord Jai and Vijay descended to the material world to serve the Lord by fulfilling his desire to fight. Otherwise, as Maharaj Yudhisthira says, Ashradeya Ivabati, the statement that the servant of the Lord could fall from Vaikuntha seems unbelievable. How Jai and Vijay came to this material world is explained by Narad Muni as follows. Ganatamarandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chakrunmalitam Yana Tasmai Shigave Namaha Kamvar Karoti Vachalam Pangam Lagate Grim Kripatamam Vande Shigavasaranam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare. The bodies of the inhabitants of Vaikuntha are completely spiritual, having nothing to do with material bodies, senses, or life here. Therefore, kindly explain how associates of the person of the Godhead were cursed to descend in material bodies of ordinary persons. So it's interesting in the verse here that the description of the inhabitants of Vaikuntha, their bodies, they are not. It's listed here as material body, senses, or life here. So sometimes people, they have a conception of life which is quite gross. They think they're the body, and then they may get a little bit more elevated and they start to think they're the mind, or they think that there's some other subtle thing, but they don't understand that the subtle body is also temporary. It's a temporary material covering, and it's not a constant. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna mentions that the seers of the truth have concluded that of the, no one remembers the actual words, of the existent, there's no cessation; of the non-existent, there's no. So the meaning of that is that that which actually exists, which is the reality of existence, which is consciousness, which is the soul, and which is the Supreme Lord, there is no cessation to that, which means has not come into being, will not come into being. And for that which is impermanent, there is actually, it doesn't come into being. It's, sometimes the example is given that people think, well, scorpions come from rice, but the thing is, the scorpion lays its eggs in the rice, and after some time, the scorpion just seems to just kind of magically coming out of the rice as if it's born from the rice. But that's only the condition that the eggs are hatched in. But the eggs are all right there. So sometimes it may appear to people that we are just come out of a material body, we just sprouted out of the connection between our parents, and then we're here. And before that, we didn't have any existence. But that's not what Krishna's talking about. And here the description of the inhabitants of Vaikuntha is that they are completely spiritual. Their bodies, even their bodies, are not anything material. Just like the Lord, none different from their bodies. Whereas we are different from our bodies. And we've had many bodies. And this present body we've got, we're so attached to it like it's the best body we've ever had. Or even if we're not very happy with it, we try to make the best of a bad bargain. We still try to enjoy it. Think, well, I'm not as pretty as I'd like to be, or I'm not as rich or good looking or intelligent as I'd like to be, but I'll do my best to enjoy. And meanwhile, we're just accepting this bodily concept of life. The more we accept that bodily concept of life, the more we are fortifying that consciousness that I am this body. Don't try to tell me otherwise, because the scientists are my authorities, and they tell me that I'm this body, so I must be. But if we're a little bit more thoughtful, then we can understand that actually we're not this body. The body is not conscious itself. The soul is situated. Often people think that their personality is within their head because there's so much senses there. So we become very much in our head. There's different ways to go to get in their head, of course. When they get a bit mental or indecisive. ISKCON jargon is actually quite interesting. It's when you come to the Krishna conscious movement, you learn so much jargon, like I'm fried, that one's out of it, I'm in my head, I'm frazzled, I'm in the left field, all these kind of things, but they don't really exist in the English language. So we learn Sanskrit, we also learn other terms. But the soul is situated within the region of the heart, and when the blood is passing through, it gathers consciousness and spreads it throughout the body. If you restrict the blood flow to the hand, then it stops healing, isn't it? There's no consciousness there. If you stop the blood flow, then you could stick something in it and you wouldn't feel it. So the soul is considered to be infinitesimal in size, described as 1/10,000th part of the tip of human hair. So that gives an idea of how small the soul is. But even at that, it's not that at some point the scientists will be able to get a microscope and say, there's the soul there, we found it, finally. They can't see the soul with a material instrument. But they can see the soul with different instruments, even with their imperfect senses. We can understand, just like we can look out the window and we see the trees are blowing a little in the breeze. And we see that's a symptom of the wind, isn't it? And the trees aren't just like having a little dance to themselves. Maybe if they get fired up in kirtan, we open the doors and the trees start dancing. So the non-moving living entities start to move. And the moving living entities become stunned, just like when Krishna plays his flute. That this is what happens. Even the river stops flowing, or they flow backwards, and the non-moving living entities, they start swaying, and the moving living entities, then they become stunned. So this is a symptom of the wind, as we can see the grass and the bushes and the trees are blowing, they're moving around, swaying in the wind. So similarly, we may not see the wind, but we know it's there. And we may not see the soul, but we know it's there because we see the symptom. The symptom is consciousness. And we can see that consciousness and beyond just the human species. Sometimes people restrict their religious activities only to the humans, and that denies the other living entities and the respect that they're due. Like sometimes we Give the example, if a fly lands on me and I go to put my hand near it, it senses here some danger and it flies away. It's not just like some kind of nervous reaction. Why would it move? It's just some kind of machine. What would be the purpose of that? So consciousness is there, and so this is the first part of this verse, that the bodies of the inhabitants of Vaikuntha are completely spiritual, have nothing to do with material body, senses, or life here. And then the second part is, therefore kindly explain how associates of the personality of Godhead were cursed to descend in material bodies like ordinary persons. And Prabhupada begins the purport by saying that this significant question would be very difficult for an ordinary person to answer. So could you imagine going up to someone in Buchanan Street in Glasgow today and asking this question? An ordinary person. Try it, go up and say, kindly explain how the associates of the personality of Godhead were cursed to descend in material bodies like ordinary persons. You say, what's wrong with you? Do we speak the same language here? Where have you just escaped from? So, what to speak of ordinary persons, even many devotees? But devotees who are following in the footsteps of Narada Muni. Now, there's one interesting occasion, pastime, where the spiritual master of Srila Prabhupada, Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati, he was a child, and he was on a train journey with his father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and his father was chanting japa on this train journey, and he seemed to go into some kind of trance. And when he came out of it, then Bhaktivedanta Saraswati says, my dear father, what was happening there? He says, ask me when you're 16. So on his 16th birthday, immediately, many years later, he says, okay, so what was it then? You know, continuing the conversation from many years before. He says, so what was it that happened at that point? And he says, actually, I was chanting my japa, and I went for a walk in the skyways, and the demigods were discussing one verse in the Bhagavad Gita, and they were a bit perplexed, and they said, oh look, here comes Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he'll know the answer. So this is also confirming that the demigods, the spiritual master is the sum total of demigods, and even the demigods, although they may have great material powers to control material elements, etc., then they also feel subordinate to these great Paramahamsas. Does anybody remember that pastime and what the question was? Remember what his answer was? So even if one commits a sinful activity, of course it doesn't mean to say, okay, that's fine, sinful activity is not bad, we can do that, we'll just chant Hare Krishna, because that's the 8th offence, isn't it? We want to avoid that. But much worse than sinful activity is Vaishnava aparad. So this word aparad means like Aradhananam Sarveshu. Radha means the greatest devotee, most devotee who is most expert at worshipping Krishna. So worship is just a word which is used because in Sanskrit sometimes there's no real counterpoint in English. So this word aparada, just like we have sampradaya or disciplic succession, we have apasampradaya, which means that which is contradictory or contravenes the disciplic succession, or that which is opposed to the disciplic succession. So we have radha and we have aparada. So we have worship, we have devotion, and we have that which is the opposite, which is the offence. These are the English words which Prabhupada chose to use. So this takes us on to why these devotees were cursed, because the four Kumaras who were about to find out the pastime, Narad Muni is just about to explain the whole story of how this came about. And in the purport here, Srila Prabhupada says that he gives a hint. He says that normally such persons entering to Vaikuntha like the four Kumaras would not be cursing, because they're great sages. They appear like young boys, little children, even naked. They're so young that they just appear naked, don't even need any clothes. Sometimes you see that children have got no clothes, and the policeman doesn't come along and say, "Okay, look you up." Indecent exposure. The child is innocent. So these sages are so innocent also that they assume the form of small children. And just like children can go anywhere and nobody blocks them, and these four Kumaras, they entered into Vaikuntha, but Dine Vijay stopped them. For some reason or other, they couldn't see. Now, these are eternal liberated souls, and they should be able to recognize the advanced devotees called the four Kumaras. But they didn't recognize them, so this is because the Lord entered into their sense of judgment, and he created some pastime where the doorkeepers of Vaikuntha, Jai and Vijay, prevented them from entering. They didn't see their qualities, and he also inspired the four Kumaras to curse them. Normally, they would be very sattvic; they wouldn't be angered. And this is mentioned in the purport here. Shishi Koditana Makashashki. And this is because the Lord wanted to conduct some pastime. And these devotees are so surrendered that they allow themselves to be used in the service of the Lord like this. And they'll have a great time. But they have nothing to do with the material world. Just like today, some of our devotees are going out on book distribution, and they're going into the city. They have nothing to do with that city. Like most people are in there either going to work for some mundane purpose, or they're going into shop. Usually one of those things, or they have some mundane business in there. And the devotees sometimes they criticize people, say, "Oh, why don't you go and get a real job?" And say, "Well, it'd be miserable like you." Misery loves company. They want us to be miserable like themselves. And Prabhupada would say, "Well, why don't you come and join us instead? If you don't like your job, come and join us." But if we tell them what we do in the day, we're up at 3:30 in the morning, we have a 4-hour morning program, then we have breakfast, and then we're out for about 10 hours, and then we come back. So what would you rather do, your 9 to 5 job, or would you want to do this? And at the end of it, and sometimes you go on a marathon, which can last 1 or 2 months, and at the end of it, you get a Mangalarti suite. You get a nice little suite offer to the deities. These are the terms and conditions. If we put these terms and conditions, we're looking for Vaikuntha people to come and join this Krishna conscious movement. We make an advertisement in the job centre. The terms are full surrender 24/7, 3 meals a day, and a Mangalarti suite once a year after the Christmas marathon. So how many people are going to run to that? But then sometimes they mistake us to be lazy people or crazy people. But that's just their ignorance. And therefore, when we continually go out there and give out this transcendental knowledge, and eventually people start to ask, well, what is it all about? Sometimes they admire the devotees' commitment to go out there day in, day out, regardless of what the weather is, regardless of what kind of abuse they get. And because the devotees have nothing to do with that material world, then they don't take that abuse seriously, they don't take the weather seriously. And they're simply there for a purpose, which is serving the purpose of the Lord. So just as Jai and Vijay, came to the material world to satisfy the Lord's purpose, then we're also taking part in the Lord's pastimes by going out there on the street, giving out books. And this weekend also we have a couple of Rath Yatras coming up, and we're taking part in Lord Jagannath's pastimes. He's coming out onto the streets to give his darshan. And we'll be chanting and distributing prasadam, and people get a glimpse into the spiritual world. And because Krishna is all attractive, then people will be inexplicably attracted to this Krishna conscious movement. And sometimes if they're a little bit sold to their demoniac mentality, then they become inimical. But even at that, even sometimes due to their inimical meditation, then finally they become favourable. We've had that in Sankirtan. I used to do book distribution near Edinburgh Castle, and there was one guy there who he dresses himself up like Braveheart, and he goes and busks with the tourists, and he used to snarl at us every day going by. And then he got a bit too aggressive, and I kind of stood up to him, and then he backed off, and then later on he came back and he explained to me actually the reason why he was so angry was because his son was going through some very difficult physical situation. He was really worried, and he was just very angry with everybody, especially anybody that had anything to do with God. So he finally, his anger boiled over, and he revealed his mind, and we became great friends, and he became like a protector of the devotees. So sometimes this happens, isn't it? So we just have to be constant in our service, and by that, Srila Prabhupada says that if a non-devotee sees a devotee performing devotional service, they're automatically raised to the mode of goodness. So just by going out and trying, even if they think, oh, it's a tough one today, I'm not doing much, I'd be as well back at the temple, overdosing on prasad, then no, just stay out there and do it. Or whatever service we're doing, don't think that it's insignificant or it's not noticed. Krishna's in our heart, he's noticing everything. That's the person we're trying to please, and the spiritual master. So we'll just stop there. Anyone got any quick questions or comments? Yeah, well, there's so many misinterpretations on that verse from the Bible. The lifeblood, they call it. For example, there's one verse where it says that you should not eat any meat with blood in it. So that's basically saying you should be a vegetarian, because you can't separate the blood from the meat. But what do? They kill the animal in such a horrible way and let it bleed out. And then they give it some name to make it seem as if it's some kind of holy food. But it's the real message there is that the animals, the meat and the blood cannot really be separated. And so the lifeblood, if you get a blood transfusion, you're not a different person. You know, just like the blood is like the oil in the car. If you change the oil in the car, you still get the same car. So they misunderstand it. Because they're in the bodily concept of life, they think that life is in the blood. And because they don't have a spiritual master to explain what that means, then they're just stuck with their own speculation of it, and therefore there's so many different factions who've got their different ideas of it, because there's no parampara. So that's the importance of following strictly parampara, not speculating, not deviating, not inventing, not fabricating. And in this way, Prabhupada said his only qualification is that he never changed anything. So how important is that qualification to not change anything? Sometimes the mode of passion thinks, well, I should do Achman like this. But if it's a speculation, why change it? Or maybe I should chant with this hand. Or maybe I'll chant in this direction. Or we just change something because the mode of passion comes in and thinks, we have to change something here because my mind's getting restless. So we're giving into our mind then, aren't we? But if we just stick to the process which is given without changing, but resisting the urges of the mind just to keep changing things, then we will actually absorb deeper and deeper into the realms of devotional service. Is that okay? Okay, it's going to go into key. Srila Prabhupada ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande. Gaura Bhaktivedanta